Welcome to the Post Sunday app. Thank you for joining us today on this video. Daniel, you did something unique again. You're always surprising us.
Well,
at Bethany Community Church.
Surprising.
But 2 chapters in one sermon, Genesis 6 and 7.
Yeah.
So someone asked a question about this.
Yeah.
Right? You had a couple questions about this.
Yeah, good questions.
Is preaching on 2 chapters at once, is that expository preaching? How would you answer that?
Well, it's a great question, and ideally, when I'm preaching expositionally, which we kind of define expositionally as, okay, here's what expositionally means: I'm taking what the text says and I'm explaining it. Here's what the message was to the original audience, and then I'm applying it to our contemporary situation. So that's the essence of expository preaching. And ideally, I would say, in an expository message, you're taking a paragraph, a thought unit, and you're walking through that thought unit.
Right.
And then you're not just taking that paragraph and that thought unit one week and then going someplace else and taking another paragraph another week. You're working sequentially through a book of the Bible or a larger portion of Scripture. Now, I wish that I could do that with every passage in Scripture, but I'm dealing with a finite amount of time, and so I did the math on this last night, actually, and I can't remember everything, but I think there's something like 31,000 Bible verses. Okay. And if you assume each paragraph is about 5 verses, you say, well, let's say that's 6,000 messages it would take to do it at that level. I'm down to about 1,500, 2,000, maybe around 2,000 messages left if I live a normal lifespan and have the normal, say I'm in my late 60s or so when I stop preaching every Sunday. So I need 3 lifetimes to do it at that level, and I wish I had them. And if someone has an idea of how other people have done this, then I would love to hear it.
Open to hearing it. Yeah.
So there's a couple things you can do. You can say, well, I'm just going to focus on the New Testament and preach through that every verse, or I'm going to preach this kind of through different sections, large portions. What I've opted to do is I've taken all of Scripture and I've said, okay, here are the chunks of Scripture. You got the Pentateuch, you have the prophetic major prophets, and then you have the minor prophets, and you have the historical books, and you have the wisdom literature in each New Testament book. And I've said, okay, how do I take this document, the Bible, and preach the whole counsel of God in the next 35 years or so, 35 years? And I've realized, well, for sure, at least in the narrative sections, I'm going to need to take larger chunks. And so I'm taking a couple chapters at a time as we go through Genesis. And I've said, well, about a year and a half through the Pentateuch, and then I do this. And it's still going to be tight, and the Lord may return tomorrow, and it's all, at least you tried. Yeah. What I still have to do, so this isn't how it would ideally go through Genesis. Ideally, I would cover each verse and talk about it for a few minutes, and then talk about the next verse and have a big theme for every paragraph. But it's what we're still doing is we're still allowing the text to control the message. Right. This is, the message is coming from the text. I'm explaining the text and applying it. And what I would that's why I encourage people as we talk about the Pentateuch, I encourage them to be reading it on their own, so that you're getting every verse and getting the full impact of expositional preaching. And I don't know of a pastor who's solved this problem perfectly. And if people have better suggestions, I would love to grow and learn in this too. So, yeah. Good question.
Well, yeah. When you brought up that question, I thought that these principles they come from the text.
Right.
You're not just saying, look, here's the 2 chapters. Let me just kind of bring in some random principles. The principles are God's judgment is slow, God's judgment is just, and God's judgment is terrible. And lastly, God's judgment is escapable.
So
pointing us towards the gospel. So a couple questions that came from the passage specifically here. Yeah. One is, what does it mean for God to be sovereign and yet be sorry for something He's done? Did He regretted making man? How do you handle?
Boy, that's a hard one.
Yeah.
And
I'm glad you're the same pastor.
Well, right now you are.
Yeah, at this moment.
Sometimes. Where were we? Speaking of regrets.
Right. What's it for God to be sovereign? Yeah, be sovereign.
Yeah, and so I think what Moses is using here is he's using some language to help us understand God's response to what's happened here. He's using what we call anthropomorphic language. He's using language that we use for humanity to help us understand some aspects of God.
Yeah.
I don't know how it all works out. I know that God doesn't change. I know that God doesn't make mistakes. And so I take those clear teachings of Scripture and apply it to a passage like Genesis 6:6. The Lord regretted that he made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. And so I think the point is not that, boy, I wish I could go back and do this differently. He's saying, okay, at this moment of time, as I look at man, there's a sense of this is not how I desire this to be, that regret in that sense. And there's grief in my heart. I'm sorry. And remember, God is eternal. He stands outside of time. And so he knows, as he looks at this event in time, he knows what the future holds. And so he regrets it, but he knows the end of the story.
So, and defining wickedness here, that's another question that came up.
Yeah.
Without the law being given, without the whole of the New Testament being written,
Yeah.
How is this? How do we know what pleases and displeases God
Yeah.
at this point in time in the biblical account?
I love that question because remember, Genesis is written after the law has been given. Moses is writing after the law. And so what this tells us is even Moses understands that the law that was given to Moses for the people of Israel wasn't the ultimate standard of righteousness. In other words, the law is given to a certain people at a certain time to help them obey God, but the essence of obedience is faith. Abraham, before the law is given, is said to keep God's laws, statutes, commandments because he lives by faith. And so Moses is judging wickedness by God's standard. Here's what it means to be obedient to God. And if you're not obedient to God, there's wickedness. You're not in conformity to his character. And righteousness, obedience before God, or I say righteousness, and then the obedience that flows from that comes from faith. And so that's the message of Genesis and the whole Pentateuch, which is kind of cool.
Yeah,
the gospel before Christ.
Now, the intent of this passage does not say, so this therefore proves that there was a worldwide flood or archaeological evidence for this or that.
Right.
But what are some resources where can you point us, or what are some evidences that you think would just be helpful for us, extra biblical resources that help us to see that the flood is a literal thing that's happened?
Well, yeah, so I should have maybe talked more. Well, again, we let the text control, and I think the purpose of this text is to tell us that God saved. And I would also, I've read some books, read some resources that talk about the scientific evidence of the flood, and I don't feel like I have the scientific background to be able to discern even what are the best resources to use. I think the text is, where I begin with is the text, and I think the text is clear that this is worldwide and that all of humanity and everything that breathes perishes except those who are on the ark. And then you can look at different apologetics websites and things like that. We can put some links to those perhaps, and have just committed us to something.
Yeah, sorry. Well, I think we can do that in some of the comments on the YouTube video.
Right. With some some resources that describe that. I don't feel like I have the scientific background to make perfect determinations about here's exactly what a worldwide flood would do, and here's this fossil record supports this. But I think what we see even in Genesis, you have pre-flood, you have the flood, and then you have post-flood, and humanity changes in significant ways after the flood, and God's relationship with humanity through the Noahic covenant changes as well, and we'll talk about that when we pick back up in a few weeks after the missions conference.
Yeah. So we're looking forward to our missions conference.
Yeah.
It starts this next Sunday, and we'll have some missionaries, some Go partners in with us. Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
So, all right. Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
And thank you, too, for tuning in today. Have a great rest of your day.